Can I get everybody's attention, please? Okay. Can you hear me? It's okay? Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for coming out to celebrate Rockville Goes Purple, an annual event, 5 years in the running, that we've been doing here in the city of Rockville. I want to quickly introduce our esteemed dignitaries, starting with County Council Member Sidney Katz and Rockville's representative, State Delegate Jim Gilchrist, former County Council Member Phil Andrews, Board of Ed candidate Julie Yang, City Council Member Dr. David Miles. Thank you, Sidney. You're on the list, so I shouldn't have forgotten you. And I'd also like to introduce, and they will be speaking later, our distinguished speakers, Judge Carla N. Smith, an awesome judge with the Montgomery County Circuit Court, one of several judges who support our adult drug court. Judge Smith will speak about the tremendous success of our adult drug court, an alternative program to incarceration. Also, artist Suzanne Furstenberg, nationally renowned local artist who, among many other known exhibits, has created several pieces of art and art experiences that focus on the why and how behind addiction and recovery. In front of us is one of her exhibits, Empty Fix, Protect Them, in the form of a shipping container with murals on the exterior and an audio and visual art experience inside. Ms. Furstenberg will share her research and conversations which have inspired this art. As I said, this is the city's 5th year participating in Rockville Goes Purple, an annual initiative recognizing National Recovery Month each September. The theme this month is Recovery is for Everyone, every person, every family, every community. So let's talk about it. This effort is also personal for our family. My brother-in-law died by suicide in 2017 after succumbing to the vice hold of opioids. Until I read Beth Macy's book, Dope Sick, I had zero understanding of the magnitude of this crushing disease, of the enormous greed that enabled pharmaceutical companies to prey on the vulnerable, the hurting, and those susceptible to addiction, of the devastation to families and friends, of the financial toll and the wrecked lives. I blamed Robert. I thought he was selfish. I thought he didn't care what his drug abuse was doing to his mother, our family, and his life. I know now that he was caught in a web, one that spun and just kept getting tighter and tighter. You know those little signs in the doctor's offices and the hospitals? The little smiley faces that ask you to rate your pain based on what the smile says? Guess who created that? Opioid manufacturers, in an effort to get more and more of us caught up in their web. It was a plan to sell as many pain prescriptions as possible, and all while assuring the world that they were not addictive. In the last 3 years, we have seen the largest increase in deaths from drug overdose in the history of the United States, a staggering record that reflects the crisis and the continued spread of the synthetic opioid fentanyl in the illegal narcotic industry. In an effort to reduce the shame and stigma surrounding the struggle with recovery and to support good health and wellness for all, Rockville has adopted the theme, Let's Talk About It, for our Rockville Goes Purple initiative. We want to encourage everyone to recognize the signs and to guide and encourage those in need to talk about it. We want to encourage friends and family to help those in need receive appropriate mental and health treatment and recovery support services. This city has several events this month to support those who are in recovery and those who struggle with recovery. You may go to our website to see details for all of these events. On the posters here, you will also see a QR code that links you to the Rockville Goes Purple webpage on our website. Last week, we took part in the first annual Montgomery Goes Purple and the county's 7th annual International Drug Overdose Awareness Day, at which my colleague, Councilmember Beryl Feinberg, spoke. Tonight, we have Vizarts hosting Behind the Mask right here on Gibbs Street. It's free, and it's an opportunity to create a mask that displays one's outer self on one side of the mask and the inner self on the other side. Or you can create anything you want. But this activity illustrates the difficulty that we all have at times in life exposing our inner self to those around us. Later this month, on September 24th, the Rockville Police Department will have a drive-through drug take-back event and free Narcan training and a Narcan kit distribution. On the weekend of September 22nd to 26th, after dusk, Vizarts will have a slideshow, Reframing Recovery, in the windows of Studio 156 on the corner of Gibbs Street and Bell Avenue. This will be a running slideshow of images submitted by individuals touched by recovery and information about recovery resources. On September 27th, Tony Hoffman will speak at Richard Montgomery High School. He will tell his story through his struggles with addiction, going to prison, and then to the Olympics as a BMX athlete. Tony is an extremely inspirational speaker, especially to young adults, who connects with audiences as he shares his struggles and his ongoing recovery. I hope you will join us on the 27th. With thanks to the BF Saw companies, the city will have a series of banners displayed at the Twin Brook Quarter Redevelopment Project on Route 355 across from Congressional Plaza. They show, through art, the complexity of recovery. After this month, the banners created by Rockville graphic staff will be displayed in the city's community centers. I apologize. Our thanks also to Clark Construction for their partnership in hanging purple lights from their cranes at the Twin Brook Quarter project. Finally, you will see purple lights and Rockville Goes Purple banners throughout our city and on our city buildings, reminding all of us of the struggle individuals, friends, and family have with the grips that opioids control, and the journey with recovery that one must travel to recapture physical, mental, and emotional health. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to Judge Carla N. Smith, Judge on the Montgomery County Adult Drug Court, for her thoughts on how Montgomery County is leading the way in alternative sentencing. Judge Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Newton. It is my sincere honor and privilege to be here tonight to celebrate and to talk about, as Mayor Newton said, opioid addiction. My name is Carla Smith. I'm a judge on the circuit court here in Montgomery County, and I'm one of 4 judges who currently sits in our adult drug court. 2 of us are active judges and 2 of us are retired judges, starting with Judge Nelson Roop, who began the drug court program 20 years ago, Judge Joe Quirk, who also is still part of the program, Judge Debbie Dwyer, and myself. I think I should also add that I'm a 1987 graduate of Rockville High School. So, as Mayor Newton said, we all are affected in some way, whether it's an immediate family member, extended family member, close family member. And as I was listening to her talk about her personal experience with her brother-in-law, I thought of my brother, Eric, who is 5 years older than me, who also barely graduated from Rockville High School in 1982, because like many people, Eric struggled with drug addiction. And he eventually overcame it. And what's true about drug addiction and overcoming is that it's not easy. It takes a lot of hard work, and it takes support from your family, your community, teachers, mentors, etc. And one thing that's true about my brother is here he is at 57 years old, and every single time I speak to him on the phone, he tells me exactly how long it's been since he's had any type of substance, and is clearly, 1, proud of himself, but 2, understands that drug addiction and getting over drug addiction is a lifelong journey, and that you have to remain committed to it. It is daily, and that's one of the things that is constantly discussed in our adult drug court, is that Every day is a new day. You have to know what your sobriety date is, and you have to make time before anything else for your recovery, for your NA, or for your AA, for your therapy, whatever the case may be. So, for those of you who don't know, Drug Court is a collaborative partnership between the Montgomery County Circuit Court, the State's Attorney's Office, the Public Defender's Office, local law enforcement agencies, our local health treatment system, parole and probation, and local employers, designed as an alternative to incarceration for nonviolent offenders who suffer from the disease of substance abuse, with the hope of ending the cycle of addiction that leads to criminal behavior. So a lot of our participants, if you look at their, quote, rap sheet, have, a full page of different convictions. And if you start to unpack what those convictions are, they're all kind of surrounding that ongoing drug addiction problem. So once we start to focus on treating their other underlying issues, treating their addiction, and really holding their feet to the fire, we start to see success. And one thing about Drug Court is, to a person, in the first few months, they all say the same thing. They can't believe how intense it is, how much time it takes, and how difficult it is. And you know that the participants are turning the corner when they start to really just accept that they have to go to 3 drug treatment NA sessions per week, when they have to go to treatment and they have to meet with their therapist. And it's no longer a complaint, but instead they see it as just part of their lives, what's expected of them and what's going to help them turn the page and move past that drug addiction. So in our adult drug court's 18-year history, we have seen 255 people graduate from our drug court. And one of the best things about the graduation, if you've never been, is that we show the photo of the person when they came into drug court and they're in active addiction. And then they get up to give their speech, because everyone has to give a speech, and they look like an entirely different person. I mean, an entirely different person. And they're so proud of where they've come, where they were, which they have to accept, and where they come. So, I was going to talk about the fact that obviously Montgomery County is no different than the rest of the country. We've seen a huge surge in the amount of opioid use, opioid-related deaths, and it's a pandemic of a different sort, right, or an epidemic of a different sort. Drug court was not saved at all during the pandemic, and I think we're still seeing the effects of the pandemic on our participants. We'd had to do a lot of online drug court, which just is not the same as being in person and seeing the judge and seeing the treatment providers and seeing the probation agent. It's just not the same thing. In 2020, we lost 3 of our drug court members, one on Christmas Day, 5 weeks after her graduation. And I point that out to say that, again, it is a lifelong commitment and struggle. I think one of the things that Mayor Newton said was that people have a tendency to want to hold in the fact that they're affected in some way by addiction, whether it's themselves or whether it's a family member or a friend. And I can remember my mom and dad not wanting to discuss what was happening with my brother. And I never felt that way, because I always felt like if you don't talk about it, then we're not going to be able to do anything about it. And I still hold that same feeling, because we have to recognize that behind all these numbers that we're talking about are human beings, members of our community, sisters, brothers, sons, daughters. And what we know is that addiction and overdose doesn't discriminate. It affects every, financial group, race, gender, all of it. Earlier in the year, we had a young man, I want to say 15 or 16 years old at one of the W schools who passed away. Played basketball, but was struggling with addiction. So we have to keep in mind that it's all around us. And for that reason, we as a community have to come together. We have to talk about it. We have to acknowledge that it is a health crisis and that we can't place blame on these people. We have to figure out how to help them and how to decrease these numbers. So as of right now, we have 64 active members in our adult drug court. The average amount of time folks stay in drug court is about 32 and a half months. 50 to 60% of them go on to graduate. And I think that number is important because it speaks to how difficult it is to beat drug addiction. Not to say difficult means impossible. We know it can be done, but it is a real struggle. And these are people who have all the resources that we can throw at them as a county, right? They have parole and probation, they have the courts, they have lawyers, they have treatment providers, therapists, and we still see a 50 to 60% graduation rate. So programs like drug court, programs like this that bring this crisis of addiction to the forefront, get us talking about it, are the things that are going to make a difference. As a judge, I see firsthand the successes of recovery, but I also see people who don't make it out, at least at that moment. Not to say that they won't later on. But giving these folks the opportunity to sustain a sober lifestyle reduces criminal activity in our community. So it's a double benefit. And one of the best parts of drug court is hearing folks say, before I came into drug court, I never had a job. I never had my own apartment. I never had my own car. And seeing the joy on their faces when they accomplish these milestones is it's what keeps us, the judges, going, because it wears on us too, right? Hearing all these stories, seeing people struggle, but it's this idea of there being a light at the end of the tunnel. So recovery teaches all of us that anything is possible and that people are capable of changing and doing great things. Initiatives like Rockville Goes Purple honor the redemptive possibilities that are inherent in all of us. It all starts here in our own backyard, here in Rockville. So I want to thank the mayor and city council members and the community for sponsoring this event today, for bringing light to it, and just really want to highlight the value of adult drug court, the value of this program, and the value of talking about it. Thank you.
Thanks to Judge Smith and thanks to the drug court. We are so glad you're in Montgomery County. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Monifa McKnight, who's joined us in purple. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Scott Joftis, Dr. Scott Joftis, who's a Board of Ed member, who's here. Thank you. I closed my book a little early. And now I'd like to welcome Suzanne Furstenberg. Please remember to take a tour of the shipping container, which is located along Maryland Avenue, adjacent to the square. It'll be open this evening from 5 to 9, and other times can be found on the city's website and at the QR code I mentioned earlier. With great fanfare and much appreciation for all of your work with the City of Rockville, Suzanne Furstenberg.
Thank you. 2 years ago, I, with the help of the public, planted 250,000 flags, small white marking flags, outside RFK Stadium. Each of those flags honored someone who had died from COVID. Last year, at this time, we were planting almost 750,000 white flags on the National Mall to mark those COVID deaths. This fall, I'm not planting white flags. Now I'm setting the alarm. I'm pulling the alarm bell because we have to understand the trauma that has happened because of the pandemic. Over 250,000 American kids lost caregivers. And even before the pandemic, in 2019, the American Academy of Pediatrics had issued this statement. They said, mental health disorders have surpassed physical conditions as the main source of impairment or limitations for adolescents. That was before the pandemic. So take the disarray that our kids were in at that time, overlay the pandemic where 250,000 lost caregivers, and where so many suffered that trickle-down trauma, that's what I call it, from their parents' stress. Their parents lost jobs, their parents lost businesses, their parents lost educational opportunities. The kids have suffered so much. And so that's why I'm here today, to thank Mayor Bridget Donald Newton for having September be honored in Rockville as National Recovery Month and making plans for all these events and doing all this. Painting Rockville purple is important. Just for your information, she could have declared, because it is, September is National Chicken Month, all right? September is National Square Dance Month. It is National Blueberry Popsicle Month, for God's sakes. This woman has shown her dedication by painting the town purple this month. So I knew nothing about drug addiction a few years before the pandemic when I was the resident artist at the Blodell Reserve on Bainbridge Island in Washington State. I had 150 acres for an entire month to roam and consider my next body of work. During that time, I would work with the grounds crew, and one of them, a 23-year-old young man, introduced himself and said, "I just got out of prison." I'm laughing and I'm saying, "No, you didn't just get out of prison. What are you talking about?" And he said, "When I was in 8th grade, my mom, she's a single mother, she wanted to relate to me, so she shared her oxy with me. By high school, I was a raging addict and I was selling drugs out of the men's room so I could fund my addiction." He got caught, he went to prison. That day, I realized that I had to figure this out. I had to understand addiction. I had to get a beat on it. And so I began what became a 24 state journey. I traveled around America to talk with people who were suffering or recovering from drug addiction, so I as an artist could understand and could translate what needed to be translated about addiction through art. So I talked with people on the street in Portland, Oregon. I talked with people at a recovery house in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I talked with recovering drug addicts at a university in Boca Raton, Florida. I talked with people at AA meetings in New York City, and they taught me a lot. When I had just started that journey, I was in Salt Lake City, and a guy at a homeless shelter, when I asked him naively, "How did you get addicted to drugs?" He said, "Oh, Suzanne," he gave me that insufferable look. He said, "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what door we got into this circus tent, whether it was hanging out with the guys smoking weed or an oxy script because of his sports injury. The circus tent entrance to which we entered doesn't matter. What matters is why we are stuck inside here." And so I began to ask why. And the stories that were recounted were unbelievable. The stories of sexual abuse, which is absolutely rampant out there, were horrifying. Neglect, social isolation, bullying. They all had stories. I would say probably 95 to 98% of them had stories. The ones who didn't have stories were the people who were older, in their 40s and 50s suffering from addiction, and they would say, you know, Suzanne, I had a great childhood. I didn't suffer any adverse things. I can remember, one guy said, I can remember a day when my dad took me out fishing. I was 12 and he beat up my brother that morning, but you know, it was fine. Older adults may not remember all of the trauma that has locked them in addiction, but addiction is really driven by that underlying psychological pain in many instances, not in all, but in many. Other things I learned while I was out there on this, as it turned out to be, sociologic study. Many of the people I interviewed had encountered drugs by the time they were 11 or 12. 12 is a ripe age for experimentation or having drugs shared with them. I mentioned that sexual abuse is absolutely off the charts out there, likely most of it unreported. Interestingly, most of the people I spoke with who were suffering from addiction, they demonstrated an immense sensitivity. They were sensitive, not just like they would get their feelings hurt, but they were sensitive to sound, light, noise, other people's emotions. And sensitive young ones may be particularly vulnerable to the pain of addiction. So I mention that because we can get underneath that and we can figure out the sensitive ones and specially design our parenting techniques and our educational techniques to meet their needs and to protect them in particular. Folks, it's not a family problem. Like, we can't expect families to solve this because many of the people I interviewed had encountered drugs or substances because of family or close friends. Likewise, the trauma that they've experienced often is at the hands or because of family situations. One young woman I met in Texas, she was the daughter of a politician from Pennsylvania, and she said, God, I couldn't stand the pain. It was so difficult to have to be somebody I wasn't. I always had to be on, and it was too hard for me. And a woman I met in New Jersey, she'd come from California, where from the ages of 3 to 7, her father sexually, emotionally, and physically abused her, and he was a high-ranking military officer. So don't let exteriors fool you. Pain is happening in many, many places around our country and to many, many people. Drugs, we don't have to have the typical drugs. I met people who were addicted to computer keyboard cleaner. I met people who were cooking fake meth using Raid anti-roach spray. So the creativity of human compulsion knows no bounds. Don't be fooled. Addiction doesn't have to hide behind a specific chemical that has a name and a person distributing it. It's hard to escape. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people who are addicted to drugs will not go to NA meetings because there's a lot of small-scale dealers who are sampling drugs outside of NA meetings. And so they go to AA meetings instead. It's hard to escape. It's also hard for addicts to escape triggers. There was a woman I met in New York City. She had gotten clean. She went to Denver and had 11 wonderful years of sobriety after having been addicted in New York City. And she said, after 11 years of sobriety in Denver, I came back to New York City, and I was coming up the subway for the first time, and a guy outside that subway said, yo, and it triggered her. She went and used. That was just the place and just the tone that her drug dealer had used. So it's hard to escape. The flow of fentanyl in particular right now is rampant, as you know from reports in the news. I learned something recently that fentanyl is even being added to the compressed tablets that people are passing off on college campuses as Adderall. So don't feel safe and understand that it could be anywhere within your child's path. The National Defense Authorization Act of 2020 established the Commission for Combating Synthetic Opioid Trafficking. So Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas, and our own David Trone from Maryland's District 6. We're co-chairs of that commission. And I just want to mention 3 things that they found out, that were in the report. Number 1, the supply cannot be stopped. We must concentrate on the demand side of this deadly equation. That should give us all a moment of pause. Number 2, given the strong link between ACEs, which are adverse childhood events, and substance use, identifying opportunities at individual level to intervene is going to be paramount to getting out of this. And number 3, one of their prime recommendations is that Congress should increase CDC funding to prevent childhood trauma and to provide funding of mental and behavioral health programs to elementary and secondary schools. That's got to happen. We have to be frontline in our schools to protect our kids who are our next generation. So what I want to do is recenter. I mentioned about my artwork in the pandemic, the data visualization of all those lives lost. This pandemic has been the largest single mass casualty event in our nation's history. We have even surpassed in the pandemic the per capita death toll of World War II. But think about this. We've lost over 50,000 people in the pandemic. Since 1999, we have lost the same number of people to addiction. So I want you to understand that addiction isn't just some problem that in September we talk about. Addiction is tantamount to these other mass casualty events as changing our nation's future, and we have to address it. So, okay, what can we do? Well, first of all, I'd love you to experience my art. From those 23, 24 states that I visited and those hundreds of people I interviewed, I came home and I created 7 different art installations to address different issues about addiction. One of them is right in front of you in the shipping container there on Maryland Avenue. It's called Protect Them, and it's meant to have you reconsider what it means to keep children safe. You can go online and preview all of my 7 art installations at emptyfix.com. I want us to think creatively. You know, we are living in one of the wealthiest counties in America, okay? And we have one of the best educated, the most brilliant minds in America are living in this county and in this city. We have the NIH here. It is incumbent upon us to lead the way. We've got to think creatively. Maybe it's a care corps as opposed to a peace corps, where we get people to look out for the mental health of others, particularly the young. Maybe it's co-teaching in upper elementary schools where you have one content teacher and one teacher who's really looking out for the psychological well-being of those kids and their involvement in that educational experience. The ideas are endless. We just have to break out of the mold that we have been in because our kids deserve this. Number 3 of 4 is next time you see a youth, ask them not just how are you, ask them how are you really doing in this moment. And don't let them say fine, because that's a lie. And then the last thing that I encourage is to, and we can all do this and we can do it just within the next 5 minutes, put down your cell phone. Put down your cell phone and be present, because you have a lot to give and you have a lot to hear. And even in that small act, you may save a life. Thank you so much.
Our thanks again to Suzanne and Carla for partnering with us today, and to our other partners, MCPS, the county, to all of our staff here, department directors, our city manager, Dr. Miles, Channel 11, and our police, our community, and most importantly, the committee. Laura Mitchell's here. Frederica Granger is the manager in the Housing and Community Development Department, who literally put this together. Suzanne sort of got it wrong. She didn't get much wrong, but I didn't do this alone. This doesn't happen alone. This is an all-in effort, everybody working together. So my sincere thanks to all of you for coming, to the committee for all your work, to staff for all your work that helps make this possible. Thanks again, everybody, and please take advantage of the exhibits, both the mask making and the empty fix. So thank you. Have a good evening and be safe.